sometimes when I get an idea, I don't know immediately what kind of book I'm writing, if it's, middle grade or YA or adult. With picture book, I know. You kind of have to know if it's a picture book. But sometimes, like I think of an idea and I'm like, oh, does this idea have enough weight to carry itself throughout the whole novel? And sometimes I have to string those little ideas one by one to make it into a longer novel. Writing for different age groups allows me to talk about the same topics seen through different perspectives. And even though my books are so different from each other, they are all about the same things: family and home, what it means to be home, what it means to leave your home. I write a lot about people who are in the gray zones of moving into the next stage in life, whether that be a child starting school for the first time, a child going through puberty, or one who's about to graduate from high school, or a person in their mid 30s when they're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? I always say, I'm in my 40s now, and I always say, like we go through this coming of age at many times throughout our lives. You can always reinvent yourself and reassess, okay, this is my life so far. What do I want for the future? We do that over and over.
Welcome to the Curious Cat Bookshop podcast, the podcast of the Independent Bookstore of Winsted, Connecticut, creating a literary community in Northwest Connecticut, bringing our local authors to the world and the world to our community in Northwest Connecticut. I'm starting to hear tiny little purrs underneath me. So if people can hear purrs, it's I've got rescue kittens in the room with me. So welcome to the Curious Cat Bookshop podcast. I am so excited tonight to welcome Yamile Saied Méndez, who is here to talk about all her books, but in particular, The Real Wish, which is also out in Spanish. So I'm going to get to that in a moment. I'm Stacy Whitman. I'm the founder and former publisher of Two Books, which is an imprint of Lee & Low Books, and I'm now an editor at large. And I'm the owner of the Curious Cat Bookshop, and that is at 386 Main Street in Winsted, Connecticut. But you don't have to be local to us to support us. We are at curiouscatbookshop.com. So events that are happening at the bookstore, you should know. This Saturday, if you are watching this the week of May, what is today? Today's the 14th. If you are watching this week, Saturday the 17th, we have kitty story time at the bookstore at 11 a.m. So these, here, I will show you guys.
Oh, my heart.
Current foster kittens will be making an appearance. They are called the Witchlings. They're the Witchlings trio of foster siblings because they're named after Claribel Ortega's Witchlings middle grade, picked by the 8 and 10-year-old patrons who are the daughters of my bookseller, Erica. So, and then every Friday night is writing group. Next week in store, our book club is reading Project Hail Mary. And you can find out all about our events, both online and in the store at curiouscatbookshop.com, and just click on the events tab. And that includes all of our offsite events too. Like later this month, we're going to be at a local library and we're going to be at the American Mural Project. So we've got a lot going on. The big thing for you to know is that we are an independent bookstore. And as such, we hope that you'll support us by buying the books that we're featuring and, more. Tonight, the book that we're featuring is The Real Wish by Yamile Saied Méndez, which I actually edited and is also available in Spanish. And even if you're not local to us, please order it from us. You can order it online at curiouscatbookshop.com for home delivery, or if you're local, you can pick it up as well. The book has received 4-starred reviews now, and we're really proud of it. So welcome, Yamile.
Hello. Thank you, Stacy. It's such a pleasure to be with you tonight.
So glad you made it.
Thank you. Yes, me too.
So Yamile Saied Méndez is the award-winning author of many books for young readers and adults, including Furia, Where Are You From?, the Horse Country series. We need to talk about horse books.
Yes.
And On These Magic Shores, among others. Oh, and here's also On These Magic Shores.
Yes.
She was born and raised in Rosario, Argentina, but has lived most of her life in a lovely valley surrounded by mountains in Utah. She's a graduate of the Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA writing program and a founding member of Las Musas, a
Yes.
marketing collective of Latine writers. So, Yamile, tell us about yourself. Tell us about all the books that you write because it's quite a wide range.
Yes, oh my goodness. It feels like there's many of them. There's about 38 if we're counting my short story contributions to different anthologies.
Oh, right.
Yes, but I have, yes, a very wide arrangement from picture book to middle grade and YA and adult, and quite a few short stories, mostly young adult. But I also co-edited an anthology of middle grade stories with Aida Salazar in Calling the Moon, which is about periods and puberty.
Mm-hmm.
What else can I tell you about me? People might know me from my YA book Furia, which was picked by Reese Witherspoon to be part of the book club. It also won the
And it
Pura
happened to one.
Belpré.
Yeah.
Yes, among many other awards, it was a Walden finalist. But the Pura Belpré was such an amazing surprise, especially because that book came out in 2020. We all know what happened in 2020. We had a book together in 2020 on these
Yeah.
magic shores, and I always call it my little neglected baby because Furia took all the spotlight from it. The amazing thing is that when the Spanish translation came out last year, it was a chance for it to be reintroduced into the world, and it was fantastic. But I also have quite a few picture books, among them Where Are You From, which was published in 2019, but it's still going strong. That is my most personal book that I've ever written, even though it's so short. It's about 500 words, but I wrote it for my children. But it's amazing how it has resonated with so many people. So it's still going super strong, and
I have it
um,
in the bookstore as well.
amazing. Yes, support your local bookstores and even the independent booksellers, even if they're not local. But that's me. The Real Wish is a book that has been a part of my life for a long, long time. I started writing it a long time ago. It's actually the book that my agent Linda Camacho signed me with 10 years ago in 2015, and nothing happened with it. And I so many other books came out. We worked on Magic Shores together, and we like working together so much that when you asked what else I was working on, I thought, oh my goodness, this book would actually be perfect for Stacy.
Perfect.
And it
And
was.
it
And
was.
yes. And even I mean, 10 years is a long time in publishing. So there were a lot of revisions, I had to modernize it, believe it or not, because especially social media became so much more important for this age group in the last few years. But I'm a believer that things happen when they should happen at the perfect moment, and I think this is the moment for this story to come out. And I am
Mhm.
delighted with the wonderful reception it has received. The start reviews, and even those journals that didn't give us stars still gave us beautiful reviews,
Right.
and it's just been a joy to be able to share this book with other people.
And you also write romance.
Yes.
Tell us about your romance novels.
Well, my romance novels, it's interesting because my agent sold those books for me in 2020 also. That year was wild because I sold the horror series, which were 4 books, the 3 books for the romance for the romance imprint, and we also sold an anthology of horror. And sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, I mean, what are your interests? Horses, romance, horror. And I say, during that year in the pandemic,
Multifaceted.
yes, in the pandemic, the only 2 things that held my attention were romance or horror. There was no in between. I always say that the 2 different faces of the same coin, right?
Interesting. I would love you to drill down a little bit more of what you mean by that.
But like these are love and fear are some of the most primal emotions that we have as humans, and they're shared no matter what culture you're from, what country, what language you speak, your beliefs. we all want to fall in love, we all want to be loved, and we are all scared as human beings of the same things, even if they take different shapes, right? So to me, those were the main things that helped me felt better when the world was in such turmoil. And so I had the idea for these three friends, and I wanted to tell the story of each one separately, but kind of combine, because that is my favorite thing to read when I'm writing a book that makes me feel all the feels. And then in the second installment, even if they're standalones, but if I see a glimpse of the couple from the first book, I always get like, oh my gosh, I know them,
They're doing
they're
okay.
doing okay. They're still going strong. And so, since that's my favorite thing to read, that's what I wanted to write. And that's what I did. You don't need to have read the other books. So I will tell you a little bit more about them. The first one that came out is Twice a Quinceañera. And the concept in a nutshell, the story is about Nadia, who's about to get married. She's been engaged forever in this toxic relationship. And finally, things are not good anymore. So she breaks off the engagement, calls off the wedding. The bad thing is that she's not going to get the money back from the venue. And her whole extended family already has plans to go to Utah for the wedding. So she can't cancel it. So she decides to throw herself a double quinceañera party because she's turning 30 also.
I love
and
it.
and she discovers that the owner of the venue was an old boyfriend from college. So of course he is the love
Ooh.
interest, and but more than like mixed it's a romance because it has all the beats of the traditional romance, but I think about it more as a women's fiction story because it's a lot more about the character's journey in finding herself. And she has two best friends, Maddie, who gets a story in Love of My Lives. And Maddie is a yoga instructor, and she is the star yoga instructor friend. And she's from Puerto Rico. And when she was 11, she had a dream that the love of her life was going to have the initials JR. So she starts dating a lot of people with those initials, with the right initials, but they were the wrong person. And she's finally in her 30s, ready to give up on love when she goes on a business trip to Puerto Rico, where she meets this dreamy tour guide who doesn't have the right initials, but there's instant chemistry. And so it's, the story of what happens when you find the person that feels right, but is not right at all. There is an explanation. He was the one, and there is an explanation of why the JR in the dream. That was so much fun to write. And then the
Perfect.
last one that comes out,
Which you can pre-order now.
yes, all roads lead to Rome. I never know where the
I love
cameras
that
are.
cover.
Yeah, I love
You've
it
got it.
too. And I wanted a blue cover and I got it. It's about the third friend, Stevie. And these are three Latina friends from different backgrounds. Some of, like, Nadia is bilingual, but Stevie doesn't speak any Spanish. It's about Stevie, who had a very tragic thing happen to her when she was 17. In her 30s, all she ever wants is to have a normal life with a husband, a couple kids, and a dog. But she feels that because of what happened when she was 17, that is never going to happen for her. So she goes to her best friend's wedding, a guy friend in Rome, and meets this guy. And again, there's instant chemistry, but neither one wants to get into a relationship. They're in Rome. And they say that when they're old, if they're not with their perfect companion, if
Well, it's
they're
a
still,
marriage compact story.
yes, but instead of doing it when they're young, they said, okay, we just want to get together with somebody who shares our sense of humor, who loves to travel, so we won't be lonely when we're old. Except, so they say, when we're 70, if we're still alone, we'll just get together, so we'll have a travel companion. And the thing is that she falls really hard for Christian. And so one of the taglines that my editor and I talked about was, what happens when your plan B becomes, the one. And so
Okay.
this one is a little, there are some trigger warnings for different things. So it is kind of a heavier story, even though she is my most maverick character that I've ever in. She's my favorite for that. And there are some dark moments in the story, but because of that, it was my favorite story to write because she does get her happily ever after, of course. But it is, again, a journey of discovering who she is and, that you can't love until you learn how to love yourself. So
Awesome.
and then the title, like I know editors say don't read your reviews. I always read them before publication. Once the book is published, I don't read them anymore. And this book is available on NetGalley, which is a platform for earlier readers. And a lot of people say, well, I love the title, but not a lot happens in Rome. But exactly that is the point, because all the roads lead to Rome. Everything that happened in the book happens in the book. It's because of what happened in Rome, and that is the reason and the cause for everything that comes after. So they spend a lot of time in other locations all over the world, but Rome is, like that ethereal
The
dream
foundation.
that they shoot for, and what cost everything.
That's awesome. So everybody pre-order that now.
Yes,
And
and look how pretty
um
they all look together.
oh, they're so
I can't
nice.
even believe I wrote this, that they're done. Oh my gosh.
So let's, now that we've learned about the books themselves, let's talk about your journey to publication. When did you
Yes.
know that you were a writer, and how did you end up getting published?
Well, that is a short question, and the answer will be so long.
It's okay.
So I'll try to summarize as much as I can.
Well, I think people are interested.
But I know people like to hear this.
Yeah.
Yes, I know that when I was trying to be published, I just devoured all the stories about, how I found my agent and how I got published. So I hope that this serves somebody who's out there trying to get published. I have always loved books. So, first and foremost, I think of myself as a reader. I started reading when I was a very young child, and I read voraciously everything. So I didn't care about, books for kids, books for adults. I just read whatever I got my hands into. And I liked writing, but I was frustrated when I was a young kid because I didn't have what I thought were original ideas. So I would write. Now we have a term for fan fiction, but back then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm just, like copying somebody else's stories. And I feel that that's what a lot of people that start writing do. You fall in love with characters or a location, and you want more of that, and it's not available, so you write it yourself. Or you're not satisfied with the ending of a book, and you write your own alternate ending. And that's what I did a lot when I was young.
And
But
that's how you learn.
yes, and we mentioned that I was born and raised in Argentina, and Argentina has a very rich tradition of literature and writers. When I mention Argentina, people immediately think of Borges, Cortázar, these amazing literary writers who I love reading, but that's not what I like writing. So I didn't think that, I could become a writer. I had never met a real writer.
Like the Argentinian equivalent of the great American novel.
Exactly, exactly. So I had never met, a woman writer, even though now looking back, a lot of my favorite stories were written by women, but I didn't know it at the time. And I didn't think that anybody could just become a writer. So when I came to the US to go to school, to go to college as a teenager, I was 19, and I majored in economics because it seemed to me like a practical major. I'm the first high school graduate in my family. Imagine, even first person in my family to go to college, and I went to another country, and I was studying in a foreign language. So I felt kind of the obligation to study something that could give me like a secure job. And now I laugh when I think about that, because we never know what life will bring to you. As it happens, when I was in college, I studied other languages like Portuguese and Italian. And I have a knack for languages. I learned very quickly. So I started working as a translator of Portuguese, from Portuguese to English and Spanish, and vice versa, when I was still in college. So that's what I did for a long time after graduation. I was a translator and an interpreter. And my husband and I married young. We moved to different states, and everywhere we moved, I had the same job that I could do from home, translating for construction companies, for the local libraries, for doctors. I would teach doctors Spanish so that they could communicate with their patients. And then I taught English learners in the evenings. And I did a lot of translating for the library. And every time I'd go to the library, I would, of course, check out books for my then really, really young children, and I would bring them home. And although I was a voracious reader as a child, our canon of literature in Argentina was very different from the one in the US. So when my children started school and they would bring home Junie B. Jones and Where the Wild Things Are, I just fell in love with those books and I just read them, of course, to them, but it was also more for me until I wanted to start writing. So I was in my late 20s. I already had four babies by then, which sounds so bananas to me now, but that's what it was. And so I had an idea, my first original idea about a girl who plays soccer or football in Rosario, Argentina. And I didn't know the first thing about writing a book, but I became friends with other people that wanted to be writers, and we created our critique group with exchange pages every month. And when people got excited about my story, it made me excited and it motivated me to write even more. And then I started attending conferences for aspiring writers. And eventually I found out about the Vermont College of Fine Arts and their master's program. And they have a special program for writing for children and young adults. And I did that program for a long time until finally I took the plunge and I said, okay, I'm going to do the MFA, which seems so wild to me because my kids, were a little older, but at that point, I already had one more kid. I had five.
Right.
My baby was 2 years old, but I thought, okay, time goes by anyway. And I want to
Right.
learn. And I wanted to find the community and I wanted to find mentors because I felt like I had taught myself all that I could learn on my own. I just needed that more personalized guidance. And so,
It was a great
yes,
program. I don't think it still is in existence anymore.
it exists with the VCFA name, Vermont College of Fine Arts, but it's not in Vermont anymore. It's in
Oh,
California.
right.
They
Right.
moved
They moved it.
around and they settled in California. So it's
I was when I was choosing my master's, I was between Vermont College of Fine Art, or well, back then it was
yes.
what you went to, or Simmons, and I ended up going to Simmons instead.
Yes. So it was amazing. I met a lot of my friends for life there. I made so many connections and I had wonderful mentors. So this happened. I started my program in 2015. And so by then I had been querying the book that eventually became Furia. That was the one about soccer. And when nothing happened with that one, I wrote another book that back then it was called A Chair of Every Color, like referencing the different colors of the dancers' dresses, of the
Oh,
Irish dancing dresses. And eventually, that book would be The Real Wish.
The Real Wish.
So I was querying that book when I met my agent. So many things happened in January of 2015 because I met my agent and then I found out that I was a finalist in the New Visions Award for
Which is
another
how this
story
happened.
on these magic shores. So
That's
even
what that seal
though
is. Whoop.
yes, so even though my journey took so many detours, it was such a winding road. But I was creating so many stories. I had so many ideas, and when I was querying one and it wasn't working out, I moved on to the next one. And then when I learned and I had to tell that first story, I would go back to it. And that's what I did a lot, back and forth. And in Vermont, like we're encouraged to try things that are out of our comfort zone. So I wrote a poem for my children, and that's the poem that became my picture book, Where Are You From? And I read that during my graduation, not even imagining that it would one day be a picture book. And so, but when I read it at graduation, everybody came up to me and said, "You have to send it to your agent." So I did. And that book sold at auction and became my first published book. So, and then after that, everything came out at once, it seemed like.
Yeah. And
But I
everybody's
had
like,
been
"How do you do so many?" It's because you were
exactly
working so long on so
on
many.
so many, exactly. Even in my book, The Beautiful Game, that came out last year, was my creative thesis at the Vermont College of Fine Arts because I did a thesis on the lack of representation of puberty in middle grade. and that was part of of what I wrote. And so, that's why I always say there's no wasted writing, because even if
Hmm.
something's not working out at a certain point, you never know what can happen later. Or again, I keep saying that I needed to get the tools to become the writer that I needed to be in order to tell those stories. I had the idea, but the execution is everything. And I needed
Well,
the
and I
training,
think
that
that,
apprenticeship.
yeah, I think this is a perfect example of what you're talking about because this was a finalist for the New Visions Award. And we worked on it. And of course, 2020 didn't help with
Exactly.
all
No,
that. We
no, no.
worked on it for what, 3 or 4 years?
Yes.
And there was parts in it that we just needed to have somebody like Elise McMullen Chiati, who is
Yes.
now actually the new senior executive editor of 2 books
Yes.
of novels at Lee and Low. And since I stepped down from being publisher, she is Cherokee and she's done so much work with us on Native representation in the books that we publish. And she consulted on this book to help us
Yes.
make sure that the Native representation worked. And it takes time
It
to
takes
get those kinds of
time.
things together.
But I always say, like, it was worth it, because I never want to put out something that's not correct, that had the potential to be harmful to a young reader. So I am so proud of this book, because we worked so hard on it. It was the best, right? It was the best that I could do at the time. And even now I go back and I sometimes I cringe a little. Oh, I would write this differently. But then I think, I worked so hard on it, and I love that book with all my heart. That On These Magic Shores, for those of you who are not familiar, is kind of a deconstruction of the Peter Pan story. So it's a little girl who wants to be the first Latina president of the U.S., and she has a plan in motion. And when the plan falls apart before it even starts, when her mom goes missing, and so it is a child who has a lot of responsibilities, who needs to learn how to be a kid again. And so that is such a personal story. When people read Furia, sometimes they ask, is this the story of your life? And I always joke that no, I did not become a professional soccer player or end up with one, because it's set in Rosario. It has so many, I gave that character so many things from my life, but really a representation more of what my childhood was like, and what my upbringing was, is reflected on these magic shores. So for those who know, they know. Like my brother, my siblings, my two brothers and my sister, they read my books. And last year my daughter visited them for Christmas, and she brought the translation in Spanish for them to learn. And then my brother wrote to me and he said, yes, I could tell where you had borrowed from real life in Furia, but this book
Mm.
is all of our childhood.
Well, and that gets to my next question, which was just tell us about the ups and downs of publishing because you've gone through a lot of hurry up and wait, which is just what publishing is.
Yes.
And you write for all these different age groups. Can you tell us about not why you write for different age groups? I think a lot of people write for different age groups, but how you feel about writing about adults having romances or versus kids
Yes.
and how you're thinking about your writing as you're thinking about what age groups you want to write for.
Yes. So just like when I was a young reader, that I didn't care what age the characters were or what age group they were written for. I just wanted to read a story. Sometimes when I get an idea, I don't know immediately what kind of book I'm writing, if it's, middle grade or YA or adult. With picture book, I know. You kind of have to know if it's a picture book. So, but sometimes, like I think of an idea and I'm like, oh, does this idea have enough weight to carry
Mm.
itself throughout the whole novel? And sometimes I have to string those little ideas one by one to make it into a longer novel. Writing for different age groups allows me to talk about the same topics seen through different perspectives. And even though my books are so different from each other, they are all about the same things: family and home, what it means to be home, what it means to leave your home. I write a lot about people who are in the gray zones of moving into the next stage in life, whether that be a child starting school for the first time, a child going through puberty, or one who's about to graduate from high school, or a person in their mid 30s when they're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life?
Right,
I always say,
exactly.
I'm in my 40s now, and I always say, like we go through these coming of age at many times throughout our lives.
Right.
You can always reinvent yourself and reassess. Okay, this is my life so far. What do I want for the future? We do that over and over. I'm in my stage in my life, like my fourth child, the one who was born when I started writing with the intent of being published, is graduating high school in 2 weeks. And I'm going to have four children who are adults and just the one at home. He'll be a teenager in July. And so I'm stepping into this new stage of my life.
It's not quite empty nest, but definitely a different moment in time.
Exactly, like a different moment from having a house full of teenagers to just having the one, and but then being much busier with my career as my husband's career is winding down. So it's interesting, and I like writing about these times in life, and I like reading about people who are going through these different stages in life. One of my favorite series that I've been reading are the, oh my gosh, I'm blanking out on his first name, but the Osman mysteries.
Oh, Richard Osman.
Yes, Richard Osman's books.
We're actually reading the Thursday Murder Club for the Lee and Low Book Club.
I adored that book. And these are people like in their 70s in a retirement community who, if you told me, like, I'd be so invested in their lives that it's fascinating. And again, it's another period where life is changing, it's becoming something new, something different. And so I like writing about those things, perhaps because I'm always straddling different worlds. I write in a language that is not my native tongue. I
Mhm.
speak Spanish at home, or when I'm super tired, I can only speak Spanish. But I write in English, and I professionally, even though I had the joy of translating my middle grades that we worked on together, you know, for the most part of my career, it happens in English. And I live in a place where there is one general religion that I'm not a part of. And so, again, I'm in that gray area. And in my family, I'm from Argentina, my husband's Puerto Rican, but my children are, neither or. And so I'm always
Both
attracted
and
to.
neither.
Exactly. And I'm thinking all the time about what it means to be in those gray spaces. And writing for different age groups allows me to explore all these topics. And it's just fun. And in this industry that's so volatile, when I run out of ideas for middle grade, I think about something for adults.
Yep. So
And
let's talk about
picture books
Oh,
are
go ahead.
hard. I'm sorry for
Oh,
cutting you. I was
yeah.
gonna say I want to write more and more picture books, but they're the hardest ones for me to write because you have to appeal to two audiences: the child reader and then the
And it's
adult.
actually
Yes,
and it's actually just harder just to boil it down.
exactly. It is. So yes, they're hard.
But let's talk about The Real Wish.
Yes.
Tell us about the plot, for those who don't know what it's about, and let's get into Florcita's story, because I think that her story is really special because this is not just a dance book. This is kind of and I wanna ask you about writing sports book because this is a sports book
It
too.
is. It is.
Go ahead.
And that's something that I discovered, I mean, writing this book and being the mom of intense athletes and dancers, how dance and cheerleading, there are these super demanding sports that sometimes as a society we don't think as sports, but they are. They're art, but they're also sport.
I was on the dance team, I know.
Yes. And so The Real Wish is the story of Florencia del Lago, who is a classical ballerina, and her dream is to become Clara in the Nutcracker. And she's super excited when she gets the part. But getting the part of the Nutcracker, when you get something that you've been wishing for a long time, there are so many things that you lose along the way. And she hadn't really thought about the things that she was going to lose. One of those was her very best friend, Selena. And friendships and friendship drama at this stage is such a big part of life. And as adults, and I made this mistake as a mom of girls going through these situations, of telling them, oh, it's not a big deal, or kind of brushing it off. But when you are 12
It
and you're
is the
having
end of the
friendship drama,
world.
it is the end of the world. There is actually a neurological reason for that. And that's something that I learned when I was researching for my master's thesis, that in our primitive brain, being left out of the pack meant a death sentence. So even though we're not
Oh.
in the caves anymore, a part like this primeval part that is still inside us feels like, okay, being left out of a friend group is pretty much like being an outcast, and which means, you're dead. And so that's why it's so dramatic when children are going through all these friendship dramas. But well, my character loses her best friend, or there is like a crack in that friendship when Florencia gets the part, because every girl wants to be Clara and there's only room for one. And the schedule is so demanding. Florencia falls back in school. There's a lot of problems in her house because of that. The parents argue a lot about her grades.
Yeah, whether it's important for her to be doing the dance thing. Also, that teacher, man,
The teachers sometimes are not the.
they pit these girls against each other.
Yes, and that happens so much, Stacy. I saw it when my daughters were in teams. Not every teacher is like that, of course. So I
Mhm.
gathered all the bad things that I saw in different people and put it into one, so created this monster, you know. But a lot of the things that the teacher tells the girls, they were taken directly from real life and things that I heard myself of teachers weighing the girls before
Right in front of each
in
other.
front of each other, and the shaming that happens. I talk a lot about that also in my soccer book, The Beautiful Game, how difficult it is to be a child athlete, and how all these responsibilities weigh so heavily on these children's shoulders when they just want to have fun. But when the parents, they live through their kids, they are so demanding, and the coaches and school and friendship, it gets to be too much, and it is too much for my poor little Florcita. So she has a panic attack on opening night of the Nutcracker, and she can't perform, but the show must go on. And so somebody else replaces her. The person is Selena, her ex best friend. And Florence is just devastated because she is kicked out of the studio when the mom has an argument with the teacher. And that happens so much, when the adults have a fight, then the children suffer. But Florencia loves dancing, but without dance, when it had been such a big part of her life, she doesn't know who she is anymore. And by chance, she gets acquainted with another dance form at a competition where her brother is working as the DJ. And this is Irish dancing, which became famous all over the world because of Riverdance, the show
Mhm.
for Eurovision that then became a worldwide phenomenon.
I didn't
And
realize that was a Eurovision thing.
yes, it was actually like it wasn't one of the main numbers. It was a show that they played during commercials, and people loved it so much that the following year it was one
Mm.
of the key numbers, and it became a sensation.
I was at
And
BYU when it became the
uh
sensation, and I was able to take an Irish dance class, and I
oh
had
my
so
gosh,
much fun. Like,
it's
I was
so much
terrible, but I had
fun.
so much fun.
Exactly. And so when Florencia sees that, and the music it can be so cheerful, but also so haunting, like all Celtic music is, right? Like
Mhm.
the violin and the accordions, they do something again to our primeval mind. And she's longing for so much. So she starts taking Irish dance classes, and she meets a new group of friends. And slowly she is able to go back to dance. And even though it's not the dance that she was used to, and culturally, it doesn't have a lot to do with her family, but Irish dance
Mhm.
is actually such a diverse activity.
Mhm.
My older daughter was a competitive Irish dancer, and she went to the Worlds 3 times in Scotland and Ireland. And
And you wrote this book? At least partly.
while I was waiting at these competitions, these dancers, they practiced for hours. Sometimes my daughter would have practice on Saturdays from 8 to 8, and she'd leave the studio crying, and she'd be like, "Oh, I want to see my friends." It was 10 o'clock at night already.
Mm.
And she was so tired, but she loved it at the same time. And she
Right.
competed and she trained. One time she told me, "Mom, I don't think I'm ever gonna be in this amazing shape again in my life." Because it was kind of like training for the Olympics. And these children go to these
Mm. Yep.
competitions and practice so much to perform for 3 minutes on stage.
Oh.
And
Mhm.
they have the hope to be recalled. Recalled in the world, in the common world, is a bad word, but in dance, when you get recalled, you get to dance a second round.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes. And so the dream is to be recalled, to have another chance that is only 3 minutes, in front of the judges. But it was magical. And I wanted to give Florencia the opportunity to dance and have fun and express herself, and also learn to live with anxiety, which is something that, in stories, sometimes we see a lot about persevering and overcoming different things. There's some things that you're never going to get rid of,
Right.
um, that they're going to be part of life.
And without spoilers, I think that The Real Wish handles the friendship in such a beautiful way because she finds a way to move forward, even though I still carry wounds from being rejected by my best friend in seventh grade. Like, I think we all do have those moments in life where the split happens, where suddenly the person you thought they were was just gone. And I think you handled it so well in this, but it's also like your triumphant sports story, but in a new way where she learns, yeah, you can train and go to the worlds or whatever, but are you enjoying yourself while you do it? Are you having friends while you do it? Are you a whole person? And I think that that's what's so lovely about this book.
I'm so glad that you think so, because that is something that was in the forefront of my mind. Again, all my five children have been very active in sports and dance and cheerleading, and for some of them, like my husband and I say that we learned so much. And with the fifth child, we're like, okay, his name's Valentino. He plays soccer and golf. You don't want to go to soccer today? Don't go. It's your team, when we see the other parents in his team, and we can tell the child is an oldest child and the parents are so demanding, and we're like, okay, not every child's gonna be
Losing that grip.
Messi. Yes, they're not gonna be Messi or Alex Morgan.
Mhm.
Some kids just want to have fun, and they go to their sports because they see their friends. And
Mhm.
when it becomes so competitive, some children thrive, but for others, it's so difficult. I had a child who would get sick to his stomach every time he had a game because he was so scared of his coach. Until my husband and I said, "Okay, this is not right. This is not normal," And so, as parents and as adults, I mean, we need to be aware of this, of the expectations that we place on children, and so many things that they're juggling. The world has become so complicated with devices and social media. And
Mhm.
when I think on seventh grade, of course, I see it through the filter of my adult mind now. I loved going to school, but it was a different time. I feel like children are juggling so many more things that we did at that age.
And yet at the same time, there's that universal human experience that
Yes.
you can't protect them from,
Yes.
but you need to help guide them through it.
Exactly. And I feel like that there's this ongoing joke among writers that, for middle grade especially, there's so many orphans. We need to kill off the parents so that the children can solve their own problems. But for this book in particular, because I have some books, in which the parents are not part of the picture. But in this particular book,
Or only temporarily too.
yes, only temporarily. Florencia had lost so much already that I wanted to give her a supportive network of new friends, and a family that, even if they didn't know how to navigate this situation, they were willing to learn with her. And they,
Yeah.
they loved her no matter what, even when they didn't understand her. And she knew that they didn't understand what she was going through. She never doubted that her family loved her. So that was important for me. And I gave her a pet, because
Yeah. Who
what
did
more,
not die.
who did
No
not
dogs die.
die, no. And she's just, there for that emotional support, which is one of the most important jobs that you can have.
Let's talk about uh tell me about a book that has shaped your life.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna say Heidi by Johanna Spiri. And I read
I hope that the
Heidi.
purring isn't too
No,
loud.
oh my
Okay,
gosh,
good.
I'm jealous of you.
He is purring and purring and purring. This
So
is one of the
cute.
adoptable babies. If you're local, come see him on
So
Saturday.
cute. Eh,
Heidi, go ahead.
Heidi was the first book that I read by myself from cover to cover when I was in first grade. And that is a big book, and it was written in the early 1900s. So I read it in Spanish. But even if you read it in English, you'll see, like the language is, this old
It's old
language.
fashioned.
It's old
Yeah.
fashioned. But
I
I
read
was
it
so
probably about
proud.
maybe second or third grade.
Yes, and I read it because in those times in the 80s there was a popular cartoon. It was anime, and it was actually created by
Miyazaki?
Miyazaki. Yes, Hayao
Really?
Miyazaki.
I didn't know he did
Yes,
a Heidi.
he did. It was before
I'm
he
gonna have to go
created
look it up.
Studio Ghibli. Yes. And when you see the animation, you're going to recognize the style because it looks
Mhm.
just like an older Silly of Totoro or the other works that we love so much. And so when I found out that that show that we all watched, all the children in my world watched, when I found out that there was a book, I read it because I wanted to learn things about the story that nobody else knew. And I remember closing that final, like reading that final page and closing the book and going immediately to the beginning again. And I read that book so many times that, believe it or not, it became a foundational story for me. And it's one of those books, that is always in my heart. I even have a Heidi tattoo. And, I always mention that because I'm from Rosario, Argentina. It's the plains. I never saw a mountain until I came to Utah for the first time. Even though we have the Andes, I never traveled to that part of my country. And what did I have in common with the girl from the Swiss Alps? Like I lived in an apartment. She lived in this mountain home with her grandfather, but I love my grandpa too and grandpas. That's why they're such a big part of all of my stories. I don't have a living grandparent in the real wish, but she talks about her grandmothers a lot. And on these magic shores, the grandma is a big part of the story. And
Right.
my picture books, there's grandparents because of Heidi again. So
Oh, okay.
and, that's something that I didn't think of consciously. But of course, if I think about it, like, why do I write the things that I write, the topics that I write about? It all goes down to, of course, my experiences in life, but these favorite stories of mine from when I was little. So, Heidi, Little Women, what else? I didn't read Anne of Green Gables until I was a grown up, but I feel like if I had read that book, I would have become obsessed because I love
I
Anne
didn't
of
read
Green
it until I
Gables.
was literally watched the Canadian production from the
Uh-huh.
'80s on the day of my high school graduation. Like, people could
Okay.
not pull me away from the TV.
Yes, I have not seen that. I haven't
Oh
seen
my
it,
gosh, you
but I
should see it.
yes.
But I've been obsessed ever since.
I went to Prince Edward Island a couple of years ago with a few friends, and we were all, dying over everything.
That's a goal.
Yes, that was the dream, and now I need to go to the Swiss Alps to, to know the place where Heidi was created.
Oh, I love it.
But something again that was foundational for me were fairy tales, traditional fairy tales, the Grimm brothers fairy tales, Hans Christian Andersen, and then older fairy tales from Argentina and Latin America that were horrifying and scary, but I was fascinated with.
And the peques in this
Yes.
are based on those Argentinian ones, right?
Yes, absolutely. Like we have this folklore about these little people, kind of like the fair folk from Ireland and Scotland and the
Mhm.
British Isles. And we say that they traveled in the ships with the immigrants and they brought them to Argentina, and they're a big part of our stories and the stories that I heard growing up. And so they do make their way into all of my stories in one way or another.
I love that. I'm just making a note for anybody in the live stream that if you have any questions for Shamile, go ahead and start adding them to the chat now because there's a little bit of a delay. So
Yes.
I will incorporate them into our conversation as they come through. Next, what are you working on next? Because you've got this third romance in your series coming out.
Yes.
You okay, number 1, before we go there, how many books do you have come out this year?
6. So this is gonna be number 5 in June, and then I have another middle grade coming out in September. It's part of the Tales of Cabin 23 with Justina Ireland and
Oh,
Anna
yeah, yeah,
Hannah
yeah.
Alkaf and Darcy Little Badger's writing the 4th one. Mine's the 3rd. It's called The Visitors, and it's special because
Which
it's
was a favorite actually at last week's school book fair.
oh, I'm so excited to hear. And I love that story because it's my first boy main character. Even though there are boys in all of my stories, of course, but this is
Mhm.
the first one that the boy is the main character, and it takes place in Argentina. And I wrote about some of our local myths about this again, weaker, weaker. Kind of like the Green Man from
The
England,
Wicker
from
Man?
yes, so the Wicker Man, but, of course, it has to be adapted to the Southern Hemisphere, so our
Mhm.
midsummer is in February, and
Right, right.
so and a little boy trying to deal with some big family problems, but also something, a mystery that's going on in their town that seems idyllic. So I'm excited about that one. And I am revising a YA right now. It's called Here Ye Mortals. And hopefully it'll come out next year. I say hopefully because I'm in that part of revision that I think I'm ruining the book. I
You
know
just never know.
perhaps it's not going to be as bad as I think it is, but it's a story of a rock and roll band in Argentina during the 70s, which is when we had the terrible dictatorship in which 30,000 people disappeared and so many artists were persecuted for their music or their books or their ideas, or sometimes
Mhm.
people were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that is the case with one of my characters in my story, and they are taken by the military police. So it's a story very dear to my heart.
Unfortunately, very timely even now.
Hello, Stacy. I thought I was writing historical fiction, but now it's more relevant than ever, and I am appalled.
Well, and actually, that leads me to a question that I did not have planned, but historical fiction.
Yes,
I think there is so I love historical fiction. We
so do
haven't done
I.
any historical fiction together, but Supriya Kalkar, as you know, was the same, New Visions class as you, right?
Yes, she was
Yes,
the
and
year after, I think.
oh,
Andrea
okay.
Wong was Axie won in my year.
Oh, right, right,
Yes,
Axie. Um, it starts to blend together,
I
but
know.
she and I have done 2 historical fictions together, and I've done a number of other historical fictions, and every single one feels so contemporary.
Absolutely.
Like, and I just read Libba Bray's new historical fiction
Yes,
that is in 3 different time periods, and wow, how much we can learn from the people who've gone before. What are you thinking
absolutely.
about, like, as you're writing it, as you're revising it, about not necessarily lessons because, like, lessons,
Nobody
it
wants to
gets
be
very
taught anything.
complicated.
Exactly.
But as you're writing about something that happened 50 years ago
Yes, that it's
and
happening again
right.
in a different way, but it is happening again. I The lesson for me has been that there are these cycles in humanity that we keep repeating, and a part, sometimes it can be very discouraging to see that as a society we seem not to have learned the right lessons, right? Because when we're confronted with these situations, we tend to repeat the same mistakes. But I feel like it's an opportunity to really see who we are. And it gives me hope that it's not for nothing, that
Mhm.
things will not remain the same. They have happened again, and humanity has recovered from them and learned. So I have to hold on to that so that I don't lose hope. Uh,
Yeah.
I honestly sometimes I'm working on this book and I become so discouraged because I think, oh my goodness, the sacrifice of these people was for nothing. But it meant a lot. It meant a lot for me when I was a young person learning about this particular time period in Argentina. I was born at the end of the 70s, so I feel like my generation feels super strongly about these things that happen, that some people in the new in younger generations feel like, oh, it wasn't that bad, or the details get lost. So I feel like it's more important than ever to tell these stories so that we never forget them, and that we at the same time can kind of see the patterns that keep happening and why, and maybe one day we won't make the same mistakes. Another lesson that I learned is that I've been thinking about this because yesterday a big leader from Latin America passed away. Pepe Mujica was the president of Uruguay, and Uruguay also had a similar dictatorship during the same period. I feel like a lot of Latin America
I was going
went
to
through
say
this
like half of
dictatorship.
Latin America.
Yes,
Yeah.
Brazil and Uruguay and Paraguay and Chile, we're all, dealing with the same problems. And he was jailed for 14 years for being part of this revolutionary groups, and then he was the president of Uruguay. He passed away yesterday, and one of the quotes that I was reading, he said, sometimes it might seem like being a good person doesn't give you much other than having peace with yourself that you were a good person. And to me, that means everything. I want to be that kind of person that even if it seems on the surface that the things that we do they're not worth it, or they don't have the effect that we think they're gonna have, at least in my heart they do. I want to be the kind of person that speaks up against injustice, that remembers the things that happened in the past and keeps telling the stories. And even if it only means a lot to me, I want to be a person of integrity and live according to my beliefs. And something else that he said is, like, he was a revolutionary. But the thing that he learned the most was that love is the only. I mean, it seems like such a cliche, but in the end, the people that you loved are gonna remember the influence that you had in life, and that
Hmm.
we all had to have a meaning for life. And if you choose for that meaning to be hatred and destruction, that is your thing. But you can always choose to live, to work for peace, to work for justice, and to work for love. And that really impacted me, and I kept thinking, okay, I want to be the person that chooses that too.
I love that. I love that so much. We do actually have a question from
Yes.
Kirsten Schiffer. She says, I'm working on a romance novel now too. I wonder how much research you do for each book and how much is just based on what you know.
Oh my gosh, sometimes the research, I think, okay, I'm writing contemporary, I won't have to do a lot of research. And then I actually do have to do a lot of research, because when I'm talking, like, for example, in All Roads Lead to Rome, then Rome
Oh, darn,
on
you have
New
to go to
Year's
Rome?
Eve, I went to Rome. So I was writing from memory. But then I'm like, okay, what is the temperature? Like, I've been in Rome, but never in January. And so I had to do some research on that, when it gets dark. I mean, things that you don't think are that important, but to me they were. And then what
If you're setting a scene,
exactly? I'm like, what time is it? Is it dark? And you can't just think it's gonna be like where you live. Like, I live in Utah, and it actually gets darker way earlier in Rome. And so I had to look that up, and then if businesses were open. And of course, I always take, artistic freedom, to make the story work. But I want it to be the most faithful to
you don't
reality
want to
as
throw
possible.
anybody out of the story who
Absolutely.
knows what you're
Yes.
talking about.
And then there's a part of the story takes place in Lake Powell, and I've been to Lake Powell so many times in my life. It's one of my favorite places in the world. But still, I didn't know a lot about the history, and I wanted to be clear about, a lot of different things that we don't think about Lake Powell, like the implications. Lake Powell is in the Diné Nation, it's the Navajo territory, and there's so many laws that are different, and they're a different time zone, even though it's in Arizona and
Oh, because
Utah. Yes,
because it's Arizona, because Arizona
exactly.
doesn't
They don't
follow
change. Some parts
yeah.
of Arizona, Phoenix does change the time. So, I wanted to get it as accurate as possible. So then I had to do the research on things that I didn't think I was gonna have to, but it makes it so much more
Even
fun,
for romance,
even for
you're not
romance.
necessarily having to do like, I know so many crime writers who have started being like, "This is for a book" in their Google searches.
Yes, I have a middle
Because
grade.
they're looking at how long a body
Yes,
can
I have a middle grade that takes place in the White House, shaking up the house. And I was writing that book before the first Trump presidency. But like online, you can find the White House blueprints and the maps of the house. And I kept thinking, oh my gosh, I hope the Secret Service knows that I'm writing a book for middle graders. I'm not planning anything. I just want to know what the house looks like and how many rooms there are on each floor. The
Speaking of,
research
have
for that
you
book was super intense.
right, have you watched The Residence? I've just started watching
Yes,
it.
I just started it
And that
too.
makes me think of that, like the way they map it out and they have the 3D
Yes,
version of it. Which is
it's
fascinating.
amazing. So yes, and I feel like that is the fun part about writing a story, like when you know so much more than you can add to the story. That's where it gets
It's also
tricky
how
in my.
you
Yes, in my historical fiction, one of the notes that my editor sent me was, so much about this time period, and it means so much to you, and you want to put it all on the page, and you can't do that. You have to, you know,
make decisions.
make decisions, and sometimes it's difficult. But I'm in that part of the revision again, and whatever. I just want the story to make sense.
That's why revision matters, definitely.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we are out of time, so I'm just going to remind readers that they can get your books, all of them,
Yes,
not just
all
these
of
two,
them.
from curiouscatbookshop.com. And where can people find you online?
I'm on social media. I have the same handle for everything. My first name, Yamile S. Méndez, Yamiles Méndez. I'm mostly on Twitter. I will call it Twitter till the end of the world. X, I guess. Instagram. Sometimes I go on Threads. I have a TikTok account, but I'm not very active there. But then I also have a website, yamilesmendez.com. And I have a contact form for in case you have questions or you want to, get in
Or
touch
if
with
you're
me
an
for
educator
anything.
who wants to do a
Yes,
school visit.
absolutely. I do a lot of school visits, so you can contact me through my website.
Perfect. Well, it's been so fun chatting with you again tonight, Yamile. We are at curiouscatbookshop.com, and we are at 386 Main Street in Winstead, Connecticut. If you're local to us, we'd love to see you. Come and join Kitty Storytime this weekend.
Yay.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.